The contractions hit like lightning as Marcus walked out of the emergency room doors, his phone pressed to his ear, leaving his wife doubled over in the hospital corridor. "I have to take this call, Elena," he said without looking back. "It's the Hartwell acquisition. Just tell them I'll be back in a few hours." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A few hours. Elena Martinez-Chen gripped the metal railing in the hallway, her water having broken 20 minutes earlier, watching her husband of 8 years disappear into the parking lot during what should have been the most important moment of their lives together. The automatic doors closed behind him with a soft hiss that sounded like a final goodbye. But Marcus had no idea that the woman he'd just abandoned in labor was the anonymous benefactor who'd purchased Hartford General Hospital 6 months earlier. He had no idea that every doctor, nurse, and administrator in that building ultimately answered to his wife. And he definitely had no idea that his callous abandonment was being witnessed by the very hospital board members who'd been trying to meet their mysterious new owner for months. The pain crashed through Elena's body again, more intense this time, as she watched Marcus's silver BMW pull out of the parking lot through the glass doors. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of obstetrics and Elena's distant cousin, appeared at her side with a wheelchair and 2 nurses, their faces showing a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed outrage. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen," Dr. Chen said gently, though her eyes flashed with anger as she glanced toward the empty parking lot. "Let's get you upstairs. Your baby isn't going to wait for anyone." Elena sank into the wheelchair, another contraction making her gasp as they moved toward the elevators. Around her, she could hear the whispered conversations of staff members who'd witnessed Marcus's departure. A security guard shook his head in disgust. A nurse muttered something about heartless husbands under her breath. The registration clerk, Maria Santos, looked like she wanted to chase Marcus down in the parking lot. What none of them knew, except Dr. Chen, was that they were looking at Elena Martinez-Chen not just as an abandoned woman in labor, but as the person who'd quietly acquired their struggling hospital through a series of shell companies and trusts. Elena had insisted on complete anonymity, wanting to observe how the hospital operated without the influence of knowing its owner was watching. The elevator doors opened on the maternity ward, and Elena found herself looking at Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the chief administrator, and Robert Kim, the head of the hospital board. They'd been making their weekly rounds when they witnessed the scene in the lobby, and both looked visibly shaken by what they'd seen. "Is that woman's husband seriously gone?" Dr. Walsh asked Dr. Chen quietly as they wheeled Elena past. "Just drove away," Dr. Chen replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Left her here alone during active labor to take a business call." Elena caught Robert Kim's expression in her peripheral vision. He looked like he was mentally taking notes, the way successful business people do when they witness something that violates their fundamental sense of decency. She almost smiled despite the pain. Robert had no idea he was looking at his boss, the woman who'd been evaluating his performance for months through quarterly reports and anonymous observations. The labor and delivery room was everything Elena had insisted on when she'd quietly funded the maternity ward renovation 3 months earlier. Private rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden she'd commissioned, state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, comfortable seating areas for family members who actually stayed for the birth of their children. "How far apart are the contractions?" Dr. Chen asked as the nurses helped Elena onto the bed. "About 4 minutes," Elena managed between breaths. "They started getting serious in the car, but Marcus said we needed to wait until his conference call was finished." The room went silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Elena saw Dr. Chen exchange a look with the attending nurse, Linda Rodriguez, who'd been with the hospital for 15 years and had seen her share of difficult family situations. "He made you wait?" Linda asked, her voice carefully controlled. Elena nodded, another wave of pain making her grip the bed rails. "The Hartwell merger is his biggest deal this year. He said the baby would wait, but the client wouldn't." What Elena didn't mention was that the Hartwell merger Marcus was so desperately pursuing was with a company that had been systematically underbidding the renovation contracts at her hospital. She'd been watching their predatory business practices for months and had been quietly building a case to have them blacklisted from future hospital projects citywide. Dr. Chen began her examination, her movements professional, but her expression growing increasingly concerned. Not about Elena's condition, which was progressing normally, but about the growing crowd of hospital staff who seemed to be finding reasons to walk past the labor room door. Word had spread quickly through Hartford General about the husband who'd abandoned his laboring wife for a phone call. "Everything looks good," Dr. Chen announced. "You're at 6 centimeters. Baby's in perfect position. We should have a little one here within the next few hours." Elena nodded, trying to focus on breathing through the contractions while mentally calculating how long it would take Marcus to finish his call and realize he should probably return. She'd given up expecting emotional support from her husband months ago, but she'd thought even Marcus would manage to prioritize the birth of his child over a business deal. She'd been wrong. Dr. Walsh appeared in the doorway again, this time with a tablet in her hands and a grim expression. "Dr. Chen, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Elena watched as the two women stepped into the hallway, their voices low but urgent. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Security footage shows him on his phone in the parking lot for 45 minutes before she even got here," Dr. Walsh was saying. "He knew she was in labor and made her wait in the car while he finished his call." "What kind of man does that?" Dr. Chen replied, her voice tight with anger. "The kind who's about to learn that actions have consequences," came a new voice that Elena recognized as Robert Kim from the hospital board. Elena closed her eyes, partly from another contraction and partly from the irony of the situation. The hospital board member who'd been trying to schedule a meeting with the anonymous new owner for months was currently planning some form of justice for the woman he didn't know was his boss. When Dr. Chen returned to the room, her expression had shifted from professional concern to something that looked suspiciously like strategic planning. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and please know that you have every right to refuse." Elena looked up, curious despite the pain. "There are several members of our hospital board here tonight for monthly rounds. They witnessed what happened in the lobby, and they're asking if you'd be willing to speak with them about your experience here. Not now, obviously, but after the baby comes." Elena almost laughed. The hospital board wanted to interview her about her patient experience, not knowing that she'd been conducting her own evaluation of their performance for months. "What kind of interview?" "Hartford General has been trying to improve our family support services," Dr. Chen explained. "When board members see a patient abandoned during labor, it raises serious questions about how we can better advocate for women in vulnerable situations." Through the window, Elena could see Marcus's BMW pulling back into the parking lot. She glanced at the clock and realized he'd been gone for over an hour, during which time her labor had progressed significantly and she'd been surrounded by more genuine care and concern from hospital staff than she'd received from her husband in months. "I'll think about it," she said, watching Marcus walk slowly across the parking lot, still talking on his phone. Dr. Chen followed her gaze and shook her head. "He's still on the call." "The Hartwell deal is very important to him," Elena said quietly, though she was beginning to realize that nothing in Marcus's life was more important to him than Marcus himself. "More important than his wife giving birth to his child?" Linda Rodriguez asked, appearing with fresh linens and barely concealed disgust. Elena didn't answer, partly because another contraction was building, and partly because she was starting to understand that everyone in this hospital was asking the same question she'd been avoiding for months. When had her husband become someone who would prioritize a business call over the birth of his child? When had she become someone who would make excuses for that behavior? Marcus finally appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, slipping his phone into his pocket and looking around the room like he was surprised to find Elena hooked up to monitors with medical staff bustling around her. "How's everything going?" he asked cheerfully, as if he'd just stepped out for coffee instead of abandoning her during active labor. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Chen, Linda Rodriguez, and a second nurse who'd come in to check Elena's IV all turned to stare at Marcus with expressions that could have frozen water. "Your wife is in active labor," Dr. Chen said carefully, her voice professionally neutral, but her eyes flashing with something much less polite. "She's progressed from 4 centimeters to nearly 8 while you were gone." "Great, great," Marcus said, pulling out his phone again as it buzzed with notifications. "The timing worked out perfectly. I just closed the biggest deal of my career." Elena watched the faces of the medical staff around her husband and realized she was seeing him through their eyes for the first time, not as the successful investment banker she'd married, but as a man who just announced that his business success was more important than being present for his child's birth. Mr. Martinez-Chen, Linda Rodriguez said, her voice carefully controlled, "Your wife has been asking for you. Labor can be frightening when you're alone." "She wasn't alone," Marcus replied, gesturing vaguely around the room. "She had all of you. Besides, Elena's tough. She can handle anything." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Elena gripped the bed rails as the pain peaked. Through it all, she could hear Marcus's phone buzzing insistently, and she watched him glance at it longingly, like a man torn between two obligations, and clearly wishing he could choose the one that didn't involve bodily fluids and emotional demands. "The baby's coming soon," Dr. Chen announced after checking Elena's progress. "Mr. Martinez-Chen, you'll want to be here for this part." "Absolutely," Marcus said, though his attention was clearly divided between Elena and his continuously buzzing phone. "How much longer do you think? I have a follow-up call scheduled with the Hartwell team in an hour." The room went completely silent, except for the beeping of monitors and Elena's labored breathing. Dr. Chen slowly turned to face Marcus, her expression one of professional incredulity. "Sir, your wife is about to give birth. This isn't a scheduled event that can be timed around your business calls." "I understand that," Marcus said, his voice taking on the slightly condescending tone Elena had learned to recognize when he felt challenged. "I'm just trying to manage expectations with my clients. They're expecting an update." Elena closed her eyes and tried to focus on breathing, but she could feel the tension radiating from everyone in the room. Through her partially open eyes, she could see Dr. Chen making subtle hand signals to Linda Rodriguez, the kind of communication that happens between medical professionals when they need to coordinate patient care around a problematic family member. What Marcus didn't know was that his problematic behavior was being observed by more than just the immediate medical staff. Elena could see Robert Kim standing in the hallway outside her room, no longer pretending to be on routine rounds, but clearly monitoring the situation with the focused attention of someone who was deeply disturbed by what he was witnessing. "Elena," Dr. Chen said gently, moving closer to the bed, "you're doing beautifully. We're going to take excellent care of you." The emphasis on "we" wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all Marcus, who seemed to finally notice that he was being subtly excluded from the support team surrounding his wife. "I'm here too," he said, moving closer to Elena's bed while simultaneously checking his phone screen. "How can I help?" "Put the phone away," Dr. Chen said firmly, "completely away. Your wife needs your full attention right now." Marcus looked genuinely surprised by the directness of the instruction, like it had never occurred to him that a doctor might have opinions about his behavior. Elena watched him reluctantly slide the phone into his jacket pocket, though she could see him glancing toward it every few seconds, like a recovering addict fighting cravings. "That's better," Linda Rodriguez said, beginning to prepare the equipment for delivery. "Now, Dad, have you thought about whether you want to cut the cord?" "Cut the cord?" Marcus repeated, looking vaguely alarmed. "Is that necessary? I mean, won't the doctor handle all the medical stuff?" Elena felt something crack inside her chest, though whether it was heartbreak or labor pains, she couldn't tell. She'd imagined this moment for months, picturing Marcus's face when he held their child for the first time, but the man standing beside her bed seemed more concerned about avoiding medical procedures than embracing fatherhood. "It's traditional for fathers to cut the umbilical cord," Dr. Chen explained patiently. "It's not medically necessary, but many families find it meaningful." "Right, meaningful," Marcus said, though his expression suggested he found the whole thing slightly distasteful. "We'll see how things go." Another contraction hit, stronger and longer than before, and Elena found herself reaching instinctively for support. Her hand found Linda Rodriguez's instead of Marcus's, because the nurse had positioned herself where a supportive partner should have been standing. "You're doing so well," Linda murmured, squeezing Elena's hand as the contraction peaked. Elena opened her eyes as the pain subsided and saw Marcus standing several feet away, his back turned as he quietly spoke into his phone. He'd managed to step away for another call while she was literally pushing their child into the world. "Mr. Martinez-Chen," Dr. Chen's voice cut through the room like a blade,
I need you to end that call and come back here immediately." Marcus turned around, looking genuinely confused by the urgency in her tone. "It's just a quick follow-up. The client had some questions about—" "Your wife is crowning," Dr. Chen interrupted. "Your baby is about to be born. End the call now." Elena watched her husband's face cycle through several emotions as he processed this information. Surprise that things were happening so quickly, annoyance at being interrupted during an important business conversation, and finally, reluctant acceptance that he was about to become a father whether it fit into his schedule or not. "I'll have to call you back," he said into the phone, then moved toward Elena's bed with the reluctant energy of someone attending a mandatory meeting. "Elena, I need you to push with the next contraction," Dr. Chen said, her attention focused entirely on the delivery, while Linda Rodriguez continued to provide the emotional support that should have been coming from Marcus. Elena pushed, feeling the intensity of the moment despite everything else that was happening. This was it. After months of pregnancy, weeks of preparation, and hours of labor, she was about to meet her child. "I can see the head," Dr. Chen announced. "One more big push." Elena bore down with everything she had, dimly aware of Marcus standing awkwardly beside the bed, looking like he wasn't sure where to put his hands or how to position himself.
She found herself focusing on Linda Rodriguez's encouraging voice and Dr. Chen's calm competence, drawing strength from the professional women who'd stepped in to provide the support her husband couldn't manage. "She's here," Dr. Chen said, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of crying. "You have a daughter." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed, as Dr. Chen placed a tiny, perfect baby on her chest. The little girl was red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly. "Hi, baby," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her daughter for the first time. "I'm your mama." She looked up, expecting to see Marcus's face filled with the same wonder and amazement she was feeling, but instead found him standing several feet away, looking uncertain and slightly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Dr. Chen asked Marcus, beginning the process of cleaning and examining the baby. "Maybe in a minute," Marcus said, pulling out his phone again as it buzzed insistently. "Let me just check this one message." The room went dead silent. Elena felt something inside her break completely, not from physical pain, but from the realization that her husband was checking his phone while their daughter took her first breaths in the world. "Sir," Robert Kim's voice came from the doorway, no longer pretending to be making casual rounds. "Could I speak with you in the hallway?" Marcus looked up from his phone, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Robert Kim, hospital board member. I'd like to have a word with you about our patient advocacy policies." Elena watched as Marcus reluctantly followed Robert into the hallway, leaving her alone with the medical staff and her newborn daughter. Through the partially open door, she could hear the beginning of what sounded like a very serious conversation about the responsibilities of family members during medical emergencies. "What a beautiful baby," Linda Rodriguez said softly, smoothing the blanket around Elena's daughter. "She's perfect." "She is," Elena agreed, though her attention was divided between her baby and the conversation happening in the hallway. She could hear Robert Kim's voice, calm but firm, explaining something about hospital policies and patient support. Marcus's responses were getting increasingly defensive. Dr. Chen finished her examination and returned to Elena's bedside, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes showing a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal concern. "Everything looks perfect," she said. "Your daughter is healthy, you did beautifully, and recovery should be straightforward." "Thank you," Elena said, meaning it more than Dr. Chen could possibly know. The care she'd received from the hospital staff had been exceptional, far beyond what she'd expected, even knowing the standards she'd insisted on when purchasing the facility. "Elena," Dr. Chen said quietly, glancing toward the hallway where Marcus was still in conversation with Robert Kim. "I want you to know that what happened tonight isn't normal. Partners don't usually leave during labor, and they certainly don't take business calls during delivery." Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say.
She'd been making excuses for Marcus's behavior for so long that having medical professionals validate her feelings felt both relieving and terrifying. Dr. Chen, she said carefully, the hospital board member who's talking to my husband, what exactly is he discussing with him? Dr. Chen glanced toward the hallway, then back at Elena. Hospital policy requires that we document any situations where patients don't receive adequate family support during medical emergencies. What happened tonight will be included in our quarterly report on patient care standards. Elena almost smiled, despite everything. Robert Kim was documenting Marcus's behavior for the quarterly report that would eventually land on her desk as the hospital's owner. The irony was almost too perfect. What happens next? Elena asked, adjusting her daughter's blanket as the baby settled into sleep. Next, you rest, recover, and enjoy your beautiful daughter, Dr. Chen said. As for everything else, that's something you'll need to decide for yourself. Through the window, Elena could see the sun beginning to rise over the hospital parking lot. She'd labored through the night, given birth to her daughter, and somehow survived one of the most important days of her life while feeling more supported by strangers than by her own husband. Marcus returned to the room 20 minutes later, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. That board member had some very strange questions about patient advocacy, he said, settling into the chair beside Elena's bed without moving to hold his daughter. I told him everything was fine, that you had excellent medical care. And did you mention that you left for over an hour during active labor? Elena asked quietly. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. That was a misunderstanding. I explained that I was handling urgent business matters that couldn't wait. Elena looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at her husband, and realized that Marcus genuinely didn't understand what he'd done wrong. In his mind, managing his business priorities was responsible behavior, and expecting him to put aside work for childbirth was unreasonable. Marcus, she said carefully, do you want to hold your daughter? He glanced at the baby, then at his phone, which had started buzzing again. Maybe after she's a little older. I don't want to wake her up, and I really need to respond to these Hartwell messages. Elena closed her eyes and tried to process the fact that her husband was more comfortable responding to work emails than holding his newborn child. Around her, she could hear the quiet movements of hospital staff who were witnessing this conversation, and she wondered what they were thinking about the family dynamics they were observing. What she didn't know was that Linda Rodriguez was making detailed notes in Elena's chart about the lack of partner support during delivery. That Dr. Chen was already planning to include this case in her next presentation about the importance of family advocacy training, and that Robert Kim was in the hallway composing an email to the hospital's anonymous owner about the need for new policies regarding patient support during vulnerable moments. Elena Martinez-Chen was about to discover that owning a hospital gave her access to more than just excellent medical care. It also provided her with a front-row seat to observe exactly what kind of husband and father Marcus had become, as documented by the very people whose job it was to protect and advocate for patients like her. The morning shift was arriving, and Elena could hear the quiet conversations as night staff briefed day staff about the patients in their care. She caught fragments of whispered conversations about the husband who left during labor and the woman who gave birth basically alone, and realized that her story was becoming part of the hospital's institutional memory. Dr. Walsh appeared in the doorway again, this time with a fresh cup of coffee and a clipboard. Good morning, Elena. How are you feeling? Tired, but good, Elena replied honestly. The staff here has been incredible. Dr. Walsh glanced at Marcus, who was absorbed in typing on his phone, then back at Elena. I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to let you know that we're implementing some new family support protocols, and your experience last night has been very helpful in identifying areas where we can improve. Elena raised an eyebrow. My experience? Patient advocacy is a priority here at Hartford General, Dr. Walsh explained. When we see situations where patients don't receive adequate support from family members, we look for ways to ensure that our staff can step in to provide additional care. What Dr. Walsh didn't mention was that the new protocols were actually being developed in response to a directive from the hospital's owner, who had been quietly observing patient care standards for months and had made it clear that vulnerable patients should never feel abandoned or unsupported. That sounds wonderful, Elena said, meaning it completely. As both a patient and the hospital's owner, she was proud of the staff's response to the situation. Marcus looked up from his phone, clearly having missed most of the conversation.
New protocols for what? Family support during medical emergencies, Dr. Walsh explained patiently. We're working to ensure that all patients receive adequate emotional and practical support during vulnerable moments. Elena had plenty of support, Marcus said, gesturing around the room. She had doctors, nurses, all the medical care anyone could need. Dr. Walsh studied Marcus for a moment, her expression carefully professional. Medical care is certainly important, but emotional support from family members is also crucial for patient outcomes. Right, of course, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he didn't really understand the distinction. I was here for the important parts. Elena felt her daughter shift in her arms and looked down to see dark eyes blinking up at her. The baby was awake, alert, and absolutely perfect. For a moment, Elena forgot about everything else and simply marveled at the tiny person she'd brought into the world. She's beautiful, Dr. Walsh said softly, moving closer to admire the baby. Have you chosen a name? Elena looked at Marcus, expecting him to participate in this conversation about their daughter, but he'd returned his attention to his phone. Isabella, Elena said finally. Isabella Martinez-Chen. Isabella, Dr. Walsh repeated, smiling at the baby. That's perfect. Marcus looked up briefly. I thought we agreed on Catherine, after my mother. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. They'd discussed names for months, but had never actually agreed on anything. Marcus had mentioned his mother's name several times, but Elena had never committed to it. We talked about lots of names, Elena said carefully. I've decided on Isabella. But Catherine has more family significance, Marcus argued, finally putting his phone aside to focus on the conversation. My mother would be thrilled. Dr. Walsh and Linda Rodriguez exchanged a look that Elena caught in her peripheral vision. The medical staff was witnessing another dynamic that apparently made them uncomfortable, though they were maintaining professional neutrality. Isabella is a beautiful name, Linda said diplomatically, and it's ultimately the mother's choice. Marcus looked surprised by this statement, like the idea that Elena might have final say over their daughter's name had never occurred to him. Well, yes, but we should consider what's best for the family. I am considering what's best for my daughter, Elena said, her voice firmer than it had been all morning. Her name is Isabella. The room went quiet, except for the soft sounds of baby Isabella making tiny noises as she looked around with unfocused newborn eyes. Elena realized that this was the first time in months she'd directly contradicted Marcus about anything significant, and the feeling was both terrifying and liberating. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and Elena watched him glance at it automatically, his attention already shifting away from the conversation about his daughter's name. The Hartwell team wants to schedule a celebratory dinner, he said, scrolling through his messages. Probably later this week, once things settle down here. Things? Elena repeated. You mean once I recover from giving birth to your daughter? Well, yes, Marcus said, looking up with confusion. I assumed you'd want a few days to rest before I started traveling again. The Hartwell deal is going to require me to be in Chicago pretty regularly over the next few months. Elena stared at her husband, holding their hours-old daughter, while he casually mentioned plans to travel regularly for business without considering how that might affect his new family. Marcus, she said slowly, we just had a baby. Don't you think we should discuss major travel commitments? It's not like I'll be gone all the time, he said, as if the conversation was unreasonable. Besides, you'll have help. We can hire a nanny. Dr. Walsh cleared her throat gently. I'm going to step out and let you two discuss your plans privately. Elena, buzz if you need anything. After Dr. Walsh left, Elena found herself alone with Marcus and Isabella, and the silence felt heavier than any they'd shared during their marriage. Marcus had returned to his phone, apparently considering the conversation about his travel schedule concluded. Marcus, Elena said, put the phone down. We need to talk. He looked up with the expression he usually wore when she interrupted his work, a mixture of patience and mild annoyance. What about? About the fact that you left me alone during labor.
About the fact that you took business calls while I was giving birth. About the fact that you just made travel plans without consulting me, hours after our daughter was born. Marcus set his phone aside, but Elena could see him glancing at it as notifications continued to arrive. Elena, I understand you're emotional right now. Labor is stressful, and hormones probably make everything seem more dramatic than it really is. The condescension in his voice was so familiar that I almost didn't react to it. Almost. But holding Isabella, surrounded by medical professionals who'd shown her more care and respect in 12 hours than her husband had managed in months, she suddenly heard his words with perfect clarity. Emotional? She repeated. You think I'm being emotional? Well, yes, Marcus said, his tone taking on the patient quality he used when explaining obvious things to unreasonable people. You've been through a lot. It's natural to overreact to things that would normally roll off your back. Elena looked down at Isabella, then back at Marcus, and realized that the man she'd married either didn't remember or didn't care that she was one of the most analytically minded people he'd ever met. Before pregnancy, before marriage, before she'd started making excuses for his behavior, she'd been Elena Martinez, the venture capitalist who'd built a portfolio worth hundreds of millions by the age of 32. She'd been the woman who'd quietly purchased Hartford General Hospital as an investment property, then become personally involved in its management when she realized how much impact she could have on patient care standards. She'd been the woman who'd never tolerated condescension from business partners, clients, or colleagues. Somehow, she'd become the woman who accepted it from her husband. Marcus, she said, her voice taking on a tone he hadn't heard from her in years. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. But before Elena could continue, Dr. Chen returned with a clipboard and an expression that suggested something significant was about to happen. Behind her walked Robert Kim and Dr. Walsh, along with a woman Elena didn't recognize wearing an expensive business suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Dr. Chen said formally, this is Catherine Morrison from Morrison Legal Services. She specializes in patient advocacy and family law. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, though he tried to maintain his casual demeanor. Is there some kind of problem? He asked, his voice taking on the defensive tone Elena had learned to recognize when he felt his authority being questioned. Catherine Morrison stepped forward, her demeanor professional but warm. Mr. Martinez-Chen, I'm here because Hartford General has recently implemented new protocols regarding patient support during medical emergencies. When situations arise where patients may not receive adequate family support, we're required to ensure they understand their rights and options.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Adequate support? Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. My wife received excellent medical care. She's fine, the baby's fine, everything worked out perfectly. Medical care and family support are two different things, Catherine replied calmly. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, you have the right to know that what happened last night, being left alone during active labor, is not standard or acceptable behavior from a support person. Elena watched Marcus's face cycle through confusion, annoyance, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. He clearly hadn't expected his actions to be scrutinized by legal professionals. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, standing up and moving toward the window. Elena, tell them this is unnecessary. We don't need lawyers involved in our family business. But Elena was looking at Catherine Morrison with growing interest. What exactly are my rights in this situation? You have the right to adequate support during medical emergencies, Catherine explained. You have the right to have your emotional and practical needs considered during vulnerable moments, and you have the right to make decisions about your own care without coercion or manipulation. Marcus spun around from the window. Coercion? Who said anything about coercion? Elena, you're not seriously going to sit there and let these people turn a simple misunderstanding into some kind of legal drama. Elena adjusted Isabella in her arms and looked directly at her husband. Marcus, sit down. We're going to finish the conversation we started. Something in her tone made Marcus stop moving.
For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain about his ability to control the direction of a conversation. As I was saying, Elena continued, her voice steady and clear, I need you to listen carefully. The woman you just spent the night dismissing and condescending to isn't the same woman you married 8 years ago. Marcus sat down slowly, his attention finally focused entirely on his wife. 8 years ago, you married Elena Martinez, a venture capitalist who'd built a portfolio worth $200 million by age 28. You married a woman who owned property in 6 states, who had business relationships with Fortune 500 companies, who could analyze market trends and investment opportunities that most people couldn't even understand. The room had gone completely silent. Catherine Morrison was taking notes. Dr. Chen and Robert Kim were listening with the focused attention of people who'd suddenly realized they were witnessing something much more significant than a standard patient advocacy consultation. But over the past few years, Elena continued, you convinced me to step back from active investment management. You said it would be better for our family if I focused on supporting your career instead of building my own. You said my work was stressful and competitive, and that a successful marriage required someone to prioritize the relationship. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Elena held up her hand in a gesture that somehow commanded immediate silence. So I did step back. I moved my portfolio to passive management. I stopped taking new clients. I turned down partnership opportunities and board positions. I became the supportive wife who managed our social calendar and attended your company events and smiled politely while you explained my own career to other people in past tense. Elena paused to look down at Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully despite the tension in the room. But here's what you never bothered to ask about, Marcus. You never asked what I did with my time when I wasn't actively managing investments. You never asked about the financial advisors I still consulted with, or the market research I still conducted, or the opportunities I continued to evaluate. Marcus was staring at her with an expression Elena had never seen before. Not confusion exactly, but the dawning realization that he might have seriously misjudged something important. 6 months ago, I made the largest single investment of my career. I purchased a struggling regional hospital that needed new ownership, updated equipment, and improved patient care standards. The silence in the room was deafening. Elena could see Robert Kim's face change as he began to process what she was saying. I bought Hartford General Hospital, Marcus. This hospital, the building we're sitting in, the staff who delivered our daughter, the administrators who witnessed you abandon me last night. They all work for me. Marcus's face went completely white. That's impossible. Is it? Elena asked, reaching for her purse and pulling out her phone. Robert, would you like to confirm that for him? Robert Kim looked like he'd been struck by lightning. You're E.M. Chen, the anonymous buyer? We've been trying to meet with you for months. I wanted to observe how the hospital operated without the influence of knowing the owner was watching, Elena explained. I wanted to see how staff treat patients, how administrators handled problems, how the entire system functioned when people thought no one important was paying attention. Catherine Morrison had stopped taking notes and was staring at Elena with something approaching awe. You've been conducting an undercover evaluation of your own hospital? For 6 months, Elena confirmed. I've attended board meetings via video conference using a voice modifier. I've reviewed every quarterly report, every patient satisfaction survey, every staff evaluation. I know exactly how this hospital operates. Marcus found his voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. Elena, why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked, Elena replied simply. In 8 years of marriage, Marcus, how many times have you asked me about my work? Really asked, not just polite conversation while you waited for your turn to talk about your deals. Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly trying to think of examples and coming up empty. I'll save you the trouble, Elena continued. The answer is never. You've never asked about my investment strategies, my market analysis, my business relationships, or my financial planning. You've treated my career like a hobby that I've been indulging until I came to my senses and focused on yours. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression a mixture of professional respect and personal amazement. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, the improvements to the maternity ward, the new equipment, the family support protocols, that was all your initiative? Among other things, Elena said, I've been particularly focused on ensuring that vulnerable patients receive adequate emotional support during medical emergencies, situations where family members might not be present or might not be providing appropriate care. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Elena had spent months developing policies to protect patients exactly like herself, patients whose family members failed to provide adequate support during medical crises. Marcus was shaking his head slowly, like he was trying to process information that didn't fit with his understanding of reality. Elena, this is insane. You bought a hospital and didn't tell me? I bought a hospital with my own money, Marcus. Money from investments you've never shown any interest in understanding. Money from a portfolio you encouraged me to ignore so I could focus on our marriage. Elena shifted Isabella to her other arm and looked directly at her husband. But here's the really interesting part. Do you remember the Hartwell merger you've been so excited about?
The deal you prioritized over your daughter's birth? Marcus nodded numbly. Hartwell Industries has been systematically underbidding hospital renovation contracts across the region. They submit proposals that look competitive, then use substandard materials and cut corners on safety protocols. 3 hospitals have had to redo major renovations in the past 2 years because of Hartwell's shoddy work. Marcus's face was changing colors as Elena spoke, cycling from white to red and back again. As the owner of Hartford General, I've been building a case against Hartwell Industries for fraudulent business practices. I have documentation of their corner cutting, evidence of safety violations, and testimony from other hospital administrators who've been victimized by their practices. Elena paused to let this information sink in. The deal you've been so desperate to close, Marcus, is with a company I'm about to have investigated for fraud. You can't do that, Marcus said weakly. You can't interfere with my business deals. I'm not interfering with your business, Elena replied. I'm protecting my investment. Hartwell Industries represents exactly the kind of predatory contractor that healthcare facilities need to avoid. Catherine Morrison had resumed taking notes, writing furiously as Elena spoke. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, how long have you been aware of the connection between your husband's deal and your hospital's vendor issues? 3 weeks, Elena said. I realized the connection when Marcus started bringing home contracts for me to review. He thought I was proofreading them for grammar and formatting. I was actually analyzing them for red flags related to hospital construction standards. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Elena, you've been sabotaging my career. No, Marcus. I've been protecting healthcare patients from substandard construction work. Your career is sabotaging itself by partnering with companies that prioritize profit over safety. Robert Kim stepped forward, his expression shifting from amazement to something more businesslike. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, as a board member, I need to ask about the implications of this situation for the hospital's vendor relationships. Hartwell Industries will be blacklisted from bidding on any Hartford General projects, Elena said firmly. I'll also be sharing our findings with other regional hospitals to help them avoid similar problems. But my commission, Marcus said weakly. The Hartwell deal was supposed to be the biggest commission of my year. Elena looked at her husband, holding their newborn daughter, while he worried about losing money from a business deal with a company she'd just exposed as fraudulent. Marcus, do you understand what you just said? I said the Hartwell commission was important to me. You said money was more important to you than the safety of hospital patients. You said your commission mattered more than ensuring that medical facilities are built to proper standards. Marcus opened and closed his mouth, clearly realizing he'd revealed something about his priorities that didn't reflect well on his character. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Catherine Morrison said, I think it would be helpful for you to know that this entire conversation has been documented as part of your patient advocacy file. Everything that's happened in the past 24 hours, including your husband's absence during labor and his response to learning about your professional activities, is now part of the hospital's official record. Elena nodded, understanding the implications. And this record will be part of the quarterly report that goes to the hospital's owner.
Which is you, Dr. Chen said, finally smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. Which is me, Elena confirmed. Marcus looked around the room at the faces surrounding him and seemed to finally understand that he was significantly outnumbered and completely outmaneuvered. Elena, can we talk privately? We are talking privately, Elena replied. Everyone in this room is bound by professional confidentiality. And honestly, Marcus, I'm not sure we have anything to discuss that wouldn't benefit from professional oversight. Professional oversight? Catherine Morrison stepped forward again. Mr. Martinez-Chen, given the pattern of behavior documented in the past 24 hours, combined with what we've learned about the family dynamics, I would strongly recommend family counseling before you make any major decisions about your relationship. Family counseling? Marcus repeated, like the words were foreign to him. Your wife has just given birth, and instead of providing emotional support, you've spent the time managing business calls and expressing concern about lost income from deals with companies she's exposing for fraudulent practices, Catherine explained. From a family advocacy perspective, this suggests some significant misalignment in your priorities. Elena watched Marcus process this information, seeing him finally begin to understand that his behavior was being evaluated by professionals who found it deeply problematic. I was handling important business, Marcus said defensively. Someone has to think about our financial future. Our financial future? Elena repeated. Marcus, I'm worth approximately $400 million. The hospital I purchased cost $60 million, which represents less than 20% of my liquid assets. The financial future you're worried about was secured before you ever heard of Hartwell Industries. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena could see him trying to process the reality that his wife was worth more money than he'd ever imagined, money that had been quietly growing while he'd been treating her like a financial dependent. $400 million? He repeated faintly. Give or take, Elena said. It fluctuates with market conditions. But yes, Marcus, the woman you've been condescending to about emotional decision-making has a net worth that exceeds the GDP of several small countries. Dr. Chen was smiling openly now. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, I have to say, this explains a lot about your approach to the maternity ward renovations. We wondered how someone could have such detailed knowledge of both patient care needs and construction management. I've been in healthcare investing for 12 years, Elena explained. I've purchased and improved 7 medical facilities across 4 states. Hartford General is my largest acquisition, but not my first. Robert Kim shook his head in amazement. The efficiency improvements, the staff training programs, the equipment upgrades, all of that came from your experience with other hospital acquisitions. Among other things, Elena said. I've also been consulting with medical professionals about best practices for patient advocacy. Last night's experience gave me some very valuable insights into areas where we need to strengthen our family support protocols. Marcus was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Elena, I had no idea about any of this. Because you never asked, Elena replied. And because every time I tried to discuss my work, you redirected the conversation to your deals, your clients, your career advancement. I thought I was being supportive by encouraging you to focus on our relationship. You thought you were being controlling by dismissing my professional accomplishments, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Catherine Morrison had been taking notes throughout this exchange, and now she looked up with a question. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, have you given any thought to how you'd like to proceed from here? Elena looked down at Isabella, who had woken up and was looking around with unfocused newborn eyes. I'd like to focus on recovering from childbirth and getting to know my daughter. Beyond that, I think I need some time to consider my options. What options? Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid of the answer. The option of whether I want to remain married to someone who prioritizes business calls over his child's birth, Elena said calmly. The option of whether I want to share my life with someone who treats my professional accomplishments like embarrassing hobbies.
The option of whether I want Isabella to grow up watching her father dismiss and condescend to her mother. Marcus looked stricken. Elena, you can't be serious about divorce. I'm serious about not accepting behavior that I wouldn't tolerate from a business partner, Elena replied. I'm serious about not modeling a relationship dynamic for my daughter that teaches her to accept disrespect from the men in her life. Dr. Chen stepped forward gently. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, would you like us to arrange for some privacy while you and your husband discuss this? Actually, Elena said, looking around the room, I'd like to take Catherine up on her suggestion about family counseling. But I'd like to make it clear that counseling would be about determining whether this marriage can be salvaged, not about convincing me to accept unacceptable behavior. Marcus opened his mouth to object, but Catherine Morrison spoke first. That's a very healthy approach, Mrs. Martinez-Chen. Counseling should never be about pressuring someone to accept treatment that damages their well-being. Treatment that damages well-being, Marcus repeated. Elena, I've never damaged your well-being. Elena looked at her husband for a long moment before responding. Marcus, you left me alone during labor to take business calls. You missed the birth of your daughter because you were on the phone. You've spent the past 3 years systematically dismissing my professional accomplishments and convincing me that supporting your career was more important than developing my own. She paused to let this sink in. If a friend told you that her husband behaved this way, what would you advise her to do? Marcus didn't answer, but his expression suggested he was beginning to understand the problem. I'll tell you what I would advise, Elena continued. I would tell her that she deserves better. I would tell her that marriage should be a partnership of equals, not a hierarchy where one person's needs consistently take priority over the others. Catherine Morrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of clarity that makes counseling productive. So what happens now? Marcus asked, looking around the room like he was hoping someone would tell him how to fix the situation. Now, Elena said, you have a choice. You can acknowledge that your behavior has been problematic and commit to genuine change through counseling. Or you can continue insisting that I'm being emotional and unreasonable, in which case I'll know that this marriage isn't salvageable. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the ultimatum. Finally, he looked up at Elena with an expression she hadn't seen from him in years, genuine uncertainty, and what might have been the beginning of respect. I think I need help understanding how we got to this point, he said quietly. That's a start, Catherine Morrison said. Acknowledging that there's a problem is the first step toward addressing it. Elena shifted Isabella to her shoulder and looked out the window at the hospital parking lot where Marcus had abandoned her less than 24 hours earlier. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The woman you married hasn't disappeared. She's been here all along, building a business empire while you were treating her like a housewife. Marcus nodded slowly. I'm starting to realize that. The question is whether you can accept being married to someone who's more successful than you are. Because that's the reality, Marcus. I've built something significant while you've been dismissing me as overly emotional and financially naive. I never meant to dismiss you, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, Elena replied. The impact of your behavior has been to make me feel unvalued and unheard in my own marriage. Dr. Chen stepped forward with a gentle smile. I hate to interrupt, but I need to check on Isabella and make sure Elena's recovery is progressing normally. Elena welcomed the interruption, feeling emotionally drained from the confrontation with Marcus. She handed Isabella to Dr. Chen for examination and tried to process everything that had happened in the past hour. She'd revealed her ownership of the hospital, exposed Marcus's business deal as fraudulent, and essentially given him an ultimatum about their marriage. None of this was how she'd imagined spending the day after giving birth, but she was surprised to find that she felt lighter rather than heavier. Isabella is perfect, Dr. Chen announced after a thorough examination. And Elena, your recovery is progressing exactly as it should. You should be able to go home tomorrow if you continue improving at this rate. Home, Elena repeated, though she wasn't sure where that was anymore. The house she shared with Marcus suddenly felt like a place where she'd been playing a role rather than living authentically. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Robert Kim said, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for this hospital. The improvements you've implemented have made a real difference in patient care. Thank you, Robert. That means a lot coming from someone who's seen the day-to-day operations. I also wanted to ask, from a board perspective, how you'd like to handle the transition from anonymous ownership to direct involvement. Elena considered this question. I think it's time for me to take a more active role in hospital management. Anonymous oversight was useful for evaluation purposes, but I'm ready to be more hands-on. Marcus looked up sharply. More hands-on? Elena, you just had a baby. Shouldn't you be focusing on recovery and motherhood? The room went silent again. Elena could feel the collective incredulity from the medical professionals surrounding her as Marcus once again demonstrated his complete failure to understand the situation. Marcus, Catherine Morrison said carefully, Mrs. Martinez-Chen has just revealed that she owns and operates a $60 million business while maintaining a $400 million investment portfolio. I think she's demonstrated that she can manage both professional responsibilities and personal ones. But the baby, Marcus protested. Someone needs to prioritize Isabella. Someone does need to prioritize Isabella, Elena agreed. The question is whether that someone will be me exclusively, or whether her father will also consider his daughter a priority. Marcus looked genuinely confused by this distinction. Of course I consider Isabella a priority. Do you? Elena asked. Because yesterday you prioritized a business call over her birth. Today, you've prioritized your commission concerns over her mother's well-being. When exactly do Isabella's needs take precedence over your business interests? Marcus didn't have an answer, and Elena realized that he genuinely didn't understand how his behavior appeared to everyone else in the room. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Dr. Chen said gently, I think you and your husband might benefit from some time to process everything that's happened. Would you like us to arrange for Mr. Martinez-Chen to have somewhere comfortable to stay while he considers his next steps? Elena understood that Dr. Chen was tactfully offering to kick Marcus out of the hospital room so Elena could rest without having to continue this emotionally draining conversation. That might be helpful, Elena agreed. Marcus, I think you should go home and think about what you want from this marriage. Really think about it.
Because the status quo isn't an option anymore. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elena's tone must have convinced him that further discussion would be counterproductive. Elena, I want to fix this. Then prove it, Elena replied. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that you understand what needs to change. After Marcus left, Elena found herself alone with Isabella for the first time since the birth. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant sounds of hospital activity in the hallway. She looked down at her daughter, this perfect little person who had no idea that her birth had coincided with the complete restructuring of her parents' relationship. Hello, Isabella, Elena whispered. Welcome to a very complicated world. Isabella blinked up at her with dark eyes that reminded Elena of her own, and Elena felt a fierce surge of protective love unlike anything she'd ever experienced. I promise you something, little one, Elena said softly. I promise that you'll grow up seeing your mother as someone who owns her own power, someone who builds things and makes important decisions and never apologizes for being successful. Elena looked around a hospital room, at the facility she owned, at the staff who respected her professional accomplishments, at the evidence of everything she'd built while Marcus was treating her like an extension of his own ambitions. And I promise you'll never see me accept treatment that I wouldn't want you to accept from a partner someday. Isabella made a small sound that might have been agreement, and Elena smiled despite the emotional turbulence of the past 24 hours. She'd given birth to her daughter in a hospital she owned, surrounded by staff who respected her professional judgment, while her husband prioritized business calls over his family. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. But it was real, and now Elena had to decide what to do with the clarity that came from seeing her marriage from the outside, documented by professionals whose job it was to advocate for her well-being. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Martinez-Chen felt like herself again, successful, competent, and unwilling to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out whether her marriage could survive her refusal to be diminished. Tonight, she was simply going to hold her daughter and remember what it felt like to be proud of who she was. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Elena was feeding Isabella when Linda Rodriguez knocked softly on the door, followed by a distinguished-looking man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen," Linda said, "this is David Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries. He's asking to speak with you." Elena looked up from Isabella with surprise, then noticed the uncomfortable expression on David Hartwell's face. Behind him, she could see Robert Kim and Dr. Walsh standing in the hallway, their presence suggesting this wasn't a casual visit. "Mr. Hartwell," Elena said calmly, adjusting Isabella's blanket, "I wasn't expecting to meet you so soon." David Hartwell stepped into the room, his confident demeanor slightly shaken by the intimate setting of a hospital room with a new mother and baby. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen, I apologize for the intrusion. I hope you don't mind me saying that this situation is quite unusual." "Which situation would that be?" Elena asked, though she had a good idea where this conversation was heading. "The situation where I discover that the woman my company has been trying to do business with through her husband is actually the anonymous owner of Hartford General Hospital," Hartwell said, his voice carefully controlled. "The same hospital that's been building a case against my company for allegedly fraudulent business practices." Elena smiled, the same calm expression she'd perfected in boardroom negotiations. "Allegedly fraudulent practices, Mr. Hartwell? Is that how you'd characterize using substandard materials and cutting safety corners on hospital construction projects?" Hartwell's composure slipped slightly. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen, I think there may be some misunderstanding about our business practices." "There's no misunderstanding," Elena replied, shifting Isabella to her shoulder. "I have documentation of 3 separate projects where Hartwell Industries submitted competitive bids, then used inferior materials and violated safety protocols. St. Mary's Hospital in Sacramento had to completely redo their emergency room renovation. Community General in Fresno discovered structural deficiencies that required immediate remediation. Should I continue?" Robert Kim stepped forward from the hallway. "Mr. Hartwell, we've reviewed all the documentation Mrs. Martinez provided. The evidence is quite comprehensive." Hartwell turned to face Robert, clearly hoping to find a more sympathetic audience. "Mr. Kim, I'm sure there are reasonable explanations for any discrepancies in our work. Construction projects are complex, and sometimes issues arise that require adjustments to original specifications." "Adjustments," Elena repeated, her voice taking on the sharp edge she'd used in hostile business negotiations. "Is that what you call installing electrical systems that don't meet hospital safety standards? Using concrete that fails strength tests? Cutting corners on fire suppression systems in pediatric wards?" The room fell silent except for Isabella's soft breathing. Hartwell looked increasingly uncomfortable as Elena systematically dismantled his attempts to minimize the severity of his company's practices. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen," his tone becoming more formal and defensive, "I'm not sure what your husband may have told you about our business relationship, but Hartwell Industries has been operating successfully for 23 years. "My husband," Elena said, emphasizing the word with barely concealed disdain, "told me nothing about your business relationship because he assumed I wouldn't understand the complexities of commercial construction. What he didn't realize is that I've been analyzing construction contracts and safety violations as part of my healthcare investments for over a decade." Elena reached for her phone with her free hand, navigating to a folder of documents while continuing to hold Isabella. "Would you like to see the comparative analysis I conducted of your work versus industry standards? Or perhaps the cost projections showing how much money hospitals have had to spend correcting your deficient work?" Hartwell's face was changing color as he realized the scope of Elena's knowledge. "You've been investigating my company?" "I've been protecting my investment," Elena corrected. "When you purchase a $60 million hospital, you develop a keen interest in ensuring that all vendors meet the highest possible standards. Your company doesn't." Dr. Walsh stepped into the room, her expression professional but grim. "Mr. Hartwell, we should also mention that Mrs. Martinez-Chen has shared her findings with the Regional Hospital Safety Board. They're opening a formal investigation into Hartwell Industries' practices across multiple facilities." Hartwell went completely still. "A formal investigation?" "Scheduled to begin next week," Elena confirmed.
I've also been in contact with the attorneys representing the other hospitals that have been victimized by your company's practices. They're quite interested in pursuing joint litigation for damages and remediation costs. The silence that followed was deafening. Hartwell looked around the room at the faces surrounding him and seemed to finally understand that he was facing something much more serious than a disgruntled customer complaint. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, he said carefully, perhaps we could discuss some kind of arrangement. Hartwell Industries is always willing to work with clients to address any concerns about our services. Concerns, Elena repeated, her voice ice cold. Mr. Hartwell, your company's practices have endangered patient safety. There is no arrangement that would make that acceptable.
Surely we can reach some kind of understanding, Hartwell pressed, his desperation becoming more apparent. What would it take to resolve this situation quietly? Elena looked down at Isabella, then back at Hartwell with an expression that could have frozen fire. Mr. Hartwell, are you suggesting that I should accept payment to overlook safety violations that could have killed hospital patients? That's not what I meant, Hartwell said quickly, but his face showed that Elena had accurately interpreted his suggestion. Because if that's what you're suggesting, Elena continued, you should know that this conversation is being recorded as part of the hospital's patient advocacy documentation, and attempting to bribe someone to overlook safety violations is a federal crime. That's not what I meant, Hartwell said quickly, but his face showed that Elena had accurately interpreted his suggestion. Because if that's what you're suggesting, Elena continued, you should know that this conversation is being recorded as part of the hospital's patient advocacy documentation, and attempting to bribe someone to overlook safety violations is a federal crime. Hartwell's face went white as he realized he'd just potentially incriminated himself in front of multiple witnesses. Robert Kim stepped forward with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd just watched a problematic vendor destroy his own credibility. Mr. Hartwell, I think it would be best if you left the hospital immediately. Security will escort you out. This isn't over, Hartwell said, trying to regain some dignity as he headed toward the door. You're absolutely right, Elena agreed. The investigation is just beginning. The joint litigation will probably take 2 years to resolve fully, and I'll be personally ensuring that every hospital administrator in the region knows exactly what kind of work Hartwell Industries produces. After Hartwell left, escorted by security guards who looked like they'd been hoping for exactly this kind of dramatic exit, Elena found herself surrounded by hospital staff who were staring at her with something approaching awe. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Dr. Walsh said, I have to ask, how long have you been planning to expose Hartwell Industries? Since the first quarterly safety report mentioned discrepancies in our recent renovations, Elena replied. It took me about 2 weeks to trace the problems back to Hartwell's work, and another month to discover the pattern of similar issues at other facilities. And your husband's business relationship with them? Robert Kim asked. Complete coincidence, Elena said. Marcus never mentioned the name of the company he was trying to close a deal with. I only made the connection when he brought home contracts for me to review, thinking I was proofreading them for grammar. Linda Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. So while he thought you were checking his spelling, you were actually conducting a forensic analysis of his client's business practices? Something like that, Elena agreed, smiling at Isabella, who had woken up and was looking around with increasing alertness. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and a slightly bewildered expression. Elena, I just received a very interesting phone call from Marcus. He wanted to know if there was any way to prevent you from interfering with his business deals. The room went silent again, this time with a different quality of tension. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach as she processed her husband's request. He asked you to prevent me from interfering with his business? Elena repeated slowly. Specifically, he wanted to know if there were any medical reasons why you shouldn't be making important decisions right now. He suggested that postpartum hormones might be affecting your judgment. Elena stared at Dr. Chen for several seconds, processing the implications of what Marcus had just done. He'd called her doctor to suggest that she was mentally incompetent due to childbirth, hoping to undermine her professional actions through medical intervention. What did you tell him?
Elena asked, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. I told him that you're in excellent health, that your judgment appears to be completely sound, and that attempting to have someone declared mentally incompetent for business reasons could constitute harassment, Dr. Chen replied. I also suggested that he might want to reconsider his approach to this situation. Robert Kim was shaking his head in disgust. He tried to have his wife declared mentally unfit because she exposed safety violations at a hospital? Because she cost him a commission, Dr. Walsh corrected grimly, he prioritized his business income over patient safety and his wife's professional judgment. Elena looked down at Isabella, who was gazing up at her with trusting dark eyes, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. The last vestige of her willingness to make excuses for Marcus's behavior dissolved completely. Dr. Chen, Elena said, her voice taking on the authority she'd used in her most important business negotiations. I need you to document Marcus's phone call in my medical record. Everything he said about my mental state, his request for medical intervention in my business decisions, all of it. Of course, Dr. Chen agreed. This is exactly the kind of behavior that patient advocacy protocols are designed to address. I also need you to contact Catherine Morrison and let her know that Marcus has escalated his attempts to control my decision-making by questioning my mental competency. Catherine Morrison appeared in the doorway as if summoned. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, I was already on my way here. I received a call from your husband's attorney about 20 minutes ago. Elena felt her heart sink. His attorney? Apparently, Marcus has decided that the best way to handle this situation is through legal action. His lawyer wanted to know if the hospital would be willing to testify that you're not mentally competent to make major business decisions. The silence that followed was broken only by Isabella making soft baby sounds as she moved in Elena's arms. His lawyer asked the hospital to testify that I'm mentally incompetent? Elena repeated. They suggested that the stress of childbirth, combined with postpartum hormonal changes, might have impaired your judgment regarding business matters, Catherine explained. They wanted medical documentation to support a claim that your recent decisions should be disregarded. Elena looked around the room, at the faces of the medical professionals who'd cared for her, who'd witnessed Marcus's behavior, who'd seen her demonstrate competence and strategic thinking throughout the most challenging day of her life. And what did the hospital's response to this request? Elena asked. Dr. Walsh stepped forward with an expression that suggested she'd been personally offended by the inquiry. We informed Mr. Martinez-Chen's attorney that Hartford General Hospital does not participate in harassment campaigns against patients, and that any further attempts to question your mental competency would be considered a form of patient intimidation. We also mentioned, Robert Kim added with grim satisfaction, that Mrs. Martinez-Chen owns this hospital, and that attempting to have her declared mentally incompetent for making sound business decisions about her own property represents a rather spectacular failure to understand the situation. Elena felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite the seriousness of the situation. How did Marcus's attorney respond to that information? There was a very long silence, followed by some rapid backpedaling about misunderstandings and communication errors, Catherine Morrison said. I think they may be reconsidering their legal strategy. I hope so, Elena said, because I'm about to give them much bigger problems to worry about. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Jennifer Walsh, please. This is Elena Martinez-Chen calling. Within seconds, Elena was connected to Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who'd represented her in several previous business acquisitions and who specialized in high-asset divorce cases. Elena, Jennifer's voice came through the phone clearly. Congratulations on the baby. I hope you're recovering well. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm calling because I need your immediate assistance with what may become a very complicated divorce situation. Elena could hear Jennifer's tones sharpen with professional interest. What kind of complications are we talking about? The kind where my husband has spent the past 24 hours trying to have me declared mentally incompetent because I exposed safety violations at a hospital I own, which resulted in his losing a business commission from the company I'm having investigated for fraud. Jesus, Jennifer said. Elena, are you somewhere private where we can talk freely? Elena looked around the hospital room at Dr.
Chen, Robert Kim, Dr. Walsh, Linda Rodriguez, and Catherine Morrison. I'm surrounded by witnesses, medical professionals, and legal advocates. I think this conversation would benefit from their input. Put me on speaker, Jennifer said. Elena activated the speaker function and placed the phone on the bedside table where everyone could hear clearly. Good morning, everyone, Jennifer's voice filled the room. I'm Jennifer Walsh, Mrs. Martinez-Chen's attorney. I understand there have been some concerning developments regarding her husband's behavior. That's putting it mildly, Catherine Morrison said, introducing herself and explaining her role as the hospital's patient advocate. Catherine, I'm familiar with your work. Your reputation for protecting patients from family harassment is excellent, Jennifer said. Can you give me a summary of what's happened? Catherine provided a concise but comprehensive overview of Marcus's behavior, from abandoning Elena during labor to attempting to have her declared mentally incompetent for making business decisions. Jennifer listened without interruption, but Elena could hear her typing rapidly, presumably taking notes. Elena, Jennifer said when Catherine finished, I need to ask you some direct questions about your assets and how they're structured. Go ahead. Are any of your major assets held jointly with Marcus? No. The hospital, my investment portfolio, and my other properties are all held in my name only or through trusts that I control exclusively. What about income from your investments? Has any of that been deposited into joint accounts? Elena thought for a moment. Some dividend payments go into our joint checking account, but the amounts are relatively small, maybe $20,000 a year. And your ownership of Hartford General, how is that structured? Through a series of LLCs and trusts designed to maintain anonymity, Marcus isn't named on any of the documentation, and he has no legal claim to the property. Jennifer was quiet for several seconds, and Elena could hear her typing furiously. Elena, this is actually much simpler than it could have been. Your assets are well protected, and Marcus appears to have severely overplayed his hand. How so? By attempting to have you declared mentally incompetent, he's created a documentation trail that demonstrates his willingness to use manipulative tactics to control your business decisions. By abandoning you during childbirth, he's established a pattern of prioritizing his interests over your well-being. And by trying to undermine your professional actions through medical intervention, he's shown that he doesn't respect your competency or autonomy. Dr. Chen leaned toward the phone. Ms. Walsh, this is Dr. Sarah Chen, head of obstetrics. From a medical perspective, would it be helpful to have documentation of Mr. Martinez's behavior during and after the delivery? Extremely helpful, Jennifer replied. Medical professionals' observations about family dynamics during vulnerable moments carry significant weight in family court proceedings. We have comprehensive documentation, Dr. Walsh added. Everything from security footage of him leaving during active labor to recorded conversations about his business priorities taking precedence over patient care. Perfect. Elena, I think we need to schedule an emergency consultation to discuss your options. Given Marcus's escalating attempts to control your decision-making, I'd recommend moving quickly to protect yourself and Isabella. Elena looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep in her arms, completely unaware that her birth had coincided with the complete breakdown of her parents' marriage. Jennifer, what are my realistic options here? Divorce with a demand for primary custody based on Marcus's demonstrated inability to prioritize Isabella's needs, asset protection through enforcement of existing trust structures, and potentially a restraining order if he continues trying to interfere with your business activities through claims of mental incompetency. A restraining order? Elena, attempting to have someone declared mentally unfit for business reasons when they're demonstrably competent can constitute a form of harassment. If he continues down this path, we may need legal protection to prevent further attempt at intimidation. Elena closed her eyes and tried to process the reality that less than 48 hours after giving birth, she was discussing restraining orders against her husband. There's something else you should know, Elena said. The business deal Marcus was so desperate to protect involved a company that I'm having investigated for safety violations. His commission would have come from fraudulent construction practices that endangered hospital patients. That's actually important, Jennifer said. It establishes that his business interests were not only incompatible with your professional responsibilities, but actively harmful to public safety. That pattern supports the argument that his judgment about priorities is fundamentally flawed.
Robert Kim stepped closer to the phone. Ms. Walsh, this is Robert Kim from the hospital board. Would it be helpful for the court to understand that Mrs. Martinez-Chen's business decisions regarding Hartwell Industries were not only sound but necessary for patient safety? Absolutely. Professional validation of her judgment from industry experts would counter any lingering questions about her competency. Elena felt Isabella stir in her arms and looked down to see dark eyes blinking up at her. Her daughter was awake again, alert and beautiful, completely dependent on her mother's ability to make good decisions about their future. Jennifer, Elena said, I want to move forward with divorce proceedings. I also want to ensure that Marcus has no legal avenue to question my business decisions or my fitness as a parent. Understood. I'll file papers this afternoon. Elena, I need to ask, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Marcus seems willing to use manipulative tactics, and men like that often escalate when they realize they're losing control. Elena thought about Marcus calling her doctor to suggest she was mentally incompetent. She thought about him trying to have his attorney question her business judgment. She thought about him prioritizing a phone call over his daughter's birth. Jennifer, it's already ugly. I'm just done pretending it isn't. Good. That clarity will serve you well in the coming weeks. After Elena ended the call with Jennifer, the room fell into a contemplative silence. Isabella had fallen back asleep, and Elena found herself surrounded by people who'd witnessed the most challenging and transformative day of her life. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Linda Rodriguez, said softly, I hope you know that what you've done takes incredible courage. A lot of women would have continued making excuses for that kind of behavior. I made excuses for 3 years, Elena replied. Having Isabella just made it impossible to continue. How so? Dr. Chen asked. Elena looked down at her sleeping daughter. Because I realized that everything I accept from Marcus is teaching Isabella what to expect from the men in her life. If I tolerate being dismissed and condescended to, I'm showing her that women should accept that treatment. That's a profound realization, Catherine Morrison said. A lot of people don't make that connection until much later, if at all. I also realized that I've been so focused on supporting Marcus's career that I forgot I had my own career to be proud of, Elena continued.
Buying this hospital and improving patient care standards is meaningful work. It shouldn't be something I have to hide or minimize. Robert Kim nodded emphatically. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, the changes you've implemented here have genuinely improved lives. The family support protocols alone have helped dozens of patients feel more secure during medical emergencies. Including yourself, Dr. Walsh added. The irony is that you developed policies that ended up protecting you from your own husband's neglect. Elena smiled at this observation. I suppose I did, though I never imagined I'd be the beneficiary of my own patient advocacy initiatives. Over the next few hours, Elena found herself holding court in her hospital room as various staff members stopped by to check on her recovery and, she suspected, to meet the mysterious owner who'd been improving their workplace for months. Dr. Martinez from the emergency department introduced himself and thanked her for the equipment upgrades that had improved trauma response times. Nurse Susan Chen from pediatrics mentioned how much the family support protocols had helped parents during difficult diagnoses. David Kim from facilities management praised the construction standards that had eliminated safety violations. Each conversation reinforced Elena's sense of pride in what she'd accomplished at Hartford General. She'd purchased a struggling hospital and transformed it into a model of patient care excellence. The recognition from frontline staff meant more to her than any business award she'd ever received. As evening approached, Dr. Chen returned to check on Elena's progress and found her reviewing financial reports on her tablet while Isabella slept peacefully in her arms. Elena, I have to ask, how are you managing to conduct business while recovering from childbirth? Elena looked up from her tablet with a slight smile. Dr. Chen, I've been conducting business while pregnant for 9 months. Recovery from childbirth is actually easier because I don't have morning sickness anymore. You're remarkable, Dr. Chen said, shaking her head. Most new mothers are focused exclusively on adjusting to the baby for the first few weeks. I'll have plenty of time to focus on Isabella, Elena replied, especially since I won't be wasting energy trying to support a husband who doesn't value my contributions. Dr. Chen settled into the chair beside Elena's bed. Can I ask you something personal? Of course.
Do you think Marcus genuinely doesn't understand how problematic his behavior has been? Or do you think he understands and doesn't care? Elena considered this question carefully. I think he understands that I'm upset, but he doesn't understand why I should be upset. In his mind, he was handling important business while I was surrounded by medical professionals who could provide everything I needed. He doesn't understand the emotional component of support during labor. He doesn't understand the emotional component of anything, Elena said. Marcus sees relationships as transactional. He provides financial security, I provide domestic support and social advancement. The idea that I might need emotional connection or intellectual respect doesn't factor into his calculations. And now that you've demonstrated you don't need his financial security? Elena smiled. Now he's trying to undermine my mental competency because it's the only way he can maintain control over the narrative. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward with a serious expression. Elena, I want you to know that if Marcus continues trying to question your fitness as a parent, the medical staff here will provide whatever testimony you need. We've observed your judgment, your priorities, and your maternal instincts. There's absolutely no question about your competency. Thank you, Elena said, feeling unexpectedly emotional. That means more than you know. We protect our patients here, Dr. Chen said firmly, and you're our patient, regardless of the fact that you also own the building. As if summoned by their conversation about patient protection, Catherine Morrison appeared in the doorway with Jennifer Walsh, who'd driven directly to the hospital after their phone consultation. Elena, Jennifer said, crossing the room quickly, we need to talk. Marcus's attorney has escalated significantly since our phone call. Elena felt her heart sink. What's happened? He's filed for emergency custody of Isabella, claiming that your recent business decisions demonstrate mental instability and pose a danger to the baby's well-being. The room went completely silent, except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Elena felt like she'd been physically struck by the audacity and cruelty of Marcus's legal maneuver. He's trying to take Isabella away from me, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's trying, Jennifer confirmed, but he's made several critical errors that actually strengthen your position. How? Jennifer pulled a thick folder from her briefcase and spread documents across Elena's bedside table. First, he filed these papers without any actual evidence of mental instability. Second, he filed them while you're still in the hospital recovering from childbirth, which looks like harassment. Third, he cited your business decisions as evidence of impaired judgment, which we can easily disprove. Catherine Morrison moved closer to examine the documents. This is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior we document in patient advocacy cases. It gets worse, Jennifer continued. Marcus's filing specifically mentions your exposure of Hartwell Industries as an example of irrational decision-making that endangers Isabella's future financial security. Elena stared at the legal documents, trying to process the fact that her husband was using her protection of patient safety as evidence that she was an unfit mother. Jennifer, what are the realistic chances that he could succeed with this? Practically zero, Jennifer replied confidently, but we need to respond quickly and decisively. The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning? I just gave birth yesterday. Which is why this is going to backfire spectacularly on Marcus, Jennifer said with grim satisfaction. The optics of a man trying to take a newborn away from her mother while she's still in the hospital are absolutely devastating. Dr. Chen stood up abruptly. Jennifer, would it be helpful to have medical testimony about Elena's competency and Marcus's behavior during the birth? Essential. Can you be in court tomorrow morning? I'll be there, Dr. Chen said firmly, and I'll bring documentation of everything that happened. Robert Kim stepped forward. Ms. Walsh, would testimony from the hospital board about Mrs. Martinez's professional competency be useful? Very useful. How quickly can you arrange that? I can have 3 board members in court tomorrow morning, along with documentation of all the improvements she's implemented at the hospital. Elena looked around the room at the people mobilizing to protect her and Isabella and felt overwhelmed by their support. There's something else, Jennifer said, pulling another document from her briefcase. Marcus's attorney made a significant tactical error. They included a request for control over your business assets during the custody proceedings. What does that mean? It means they've explicitly connected his custody claim to his desire to control your financial resources. That transforms this from a legitimate custody concern into an obvious attempt at economic manipulation. Catherine Morrison was reading over the documents with increasing amazement. They're literally arguing that she should lose custody of her child because she made business decisions that cost him money. Exactly, Jennifer said, which makes this one of the most obviously manipulative custody filings I've ever seen. Elena felt something fierce and protective rise up inside her as she looked down at Isabella. Jennifer, I want to countersue, not just for divorce, but for everything: fraud, harassment, attempted economic coercion, whatever charges apply to what he's done. Elena, I was hoping you'd say that, Jennifer replied with a smile that suggested she was looking forward to the upcoming legal battle, because Marcus has given us enough ammunition to destroy him completely. What do you mean? Jennifer spread more documents across the table. His attempts to have you declared mentally incompetent are documented harassment. His abandonment during childbirth demonstrates unfitness as a parent. His business relationship with Hartwell Industries connects him to a company under investigation for fraud. And his emergency custody filing proves he's willing to traumatize his newborn daughter to maintain control over your assets. Dr. Walsh, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward with a determined expression. Ms. Walsh, would it be helpful to have testimony about the safety violations that Mrs. Martinez-Chen exposed? We can demonstrate that her business decisions were not only sound, but necessary for public safety. That would be devastating to Marcus's case, Jennifer agreed. We'd be proving that he prioritized personal profit over patient safety, then tried to punish his wife for doing the right thing. Elena felt Isabella stir in her arms and looked down to see alert dark eyes gazing up at her. Her daughter was awake again, completely trusting and dependent on her mother's ability to protect them both. Isabella, Elena whispered, your daddy is about to learn that underestimating your mama was the biggest mistake of his life. Jennifer gathered the documents back into her briefcase with efficient movements. Elena, I need you to rest tonight. Tomorrow is going to be intense, but we're going to win decisively. How can you be so confident? Because Marcus has committed every possible tactical error while you've maintained the moral and legal high ground, Jennifer explained. He abandoned you during childbirth, tried to have you declared mentally incompetent, filed frivolous custody claims, and attempted to punish you for exposing public safety violations. Meanwhile, you've demonstrated competent business judgment, protected patient safety, and maintained your composure throughout his harassment campaign. Dr. Chen moved to check Elena's vital signs and nodded approvingly at the readings. Elena, from a medical perspective, you're recovering beautifully. Your stress levels are remarkably low considering everything that's happening. I think I'm too angry to be stressed, Elena replied. Marcus has underestimated me for the last time. After Jennifer and the hospital staff left for the evening, Elena found herself alone with Isabella for the first time since the custody filing. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of her daughter's breathing and the distant hum of hospital activity. She looked down at Isabella's perfect face and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Isabella, she whispered, I promise you that your father's attempt to use you as a weapon against me will be the last manipulative thing he ever gets away with. Elena reached for her phone and called her sister Marianne, who answered on the first ring. Elena, how are you feeling? I was going to visit tomorrow, but Marianne, I need you to listen carefully. Marcus has filed for emergency custody of Isabella. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Marianne spoke, her voice tight with controlled fury. That bastard is trying to take your baby away from you while you're still in the hospital? He's claiming that my business decisions prove I'm mentally unstable and pose a danger to Isabella's well-being. Business decisions like what? Elena explained about Hartwell Industries, the safety violations, and Marcus's lost commission. As she spoke, she could hear Marianne's breathing getting progressively more agitated. So he's trying to take Isabella away from you because you prevented a construction company from endangering hospital patients? Marianne's voice was incredulous. That's correct. Elena, what do you need from me? I need you in court tomorrow morning. Jennifer thinks family testimony about Marcus's character will be helpful. I'll be there, Marianne said without hesitation. And Elena, I've been waiting 3 years for you to finally see Marcus for what he really is. I'm proud of you for fighting back. Thank you. That means everything to me.
After hanging up with Marianne, Elena made several more calls. Her parents, who were driving from San Diego and would arrive by morning, her business partner from her previous investment firm, who could testify about her professional competency, her financial advisor, who could provide documentation of her asset management skills. By the time she finished making arrangements, Elena had assembled a formidable team of witnesses who could counter every aspect of Marcus's custody claim. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and Elena found herself preparing for the most important legal battle of her life while simultaneously learning to change diapers and manage breastfeeding schedules. Dr. Chen appeared at 7 a.m. with discharge papers and a serious expression. "Elena, you're medically cleared to leave the hospital, but I want you to know that you don't have to attend this hearing. You gave birth 36 hours ago, and no one would expect you to appear in court. Dr. Chen, if I don't appear in court, Marcus will claim that my absence proves I'm too unstable to care for Isabella. I'm going to be there. In that case," Dr. Chen said, "I've arranged for a private car to take you to the courthouse and will have a nurse accompany you to assist with Isabella during the proceedings." Elena felt overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the hospital staff. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, we do," Dr. Chen replied firmly. "We protect our patients, and that includes protecting them from harassment disguised as legal proceedings." An hour later, Elena found herself in the back of a comfortable sedan, holding Isabella while Linda Rodriguez sat beside her with a fully stocked diaper bag and the confidence of someone who'd been caring for newborns for 15 years. "Mrs. Martinez-Chen," Linda said, "I want you to know that every staff member at Hartford General is rooting for you today. What Marcus is doing is unconscionable." "Thank you, Linda. Having you there will make this much easier." "I've testified in family court before," Linda said. "Judges don't like it when fathers try to separate newborns from their mothers for obviously manipulative reasons." The courthouse was an imposing building of gray stone and tall windows, but Elena felt calmer than she'd expected as they walked through the metal detectors and took the elevator to the family court floor. Jennifer was waiting in the hallway with a confidence that suggested excellent preparation. Behind her stood an impressive array of people who'd come to support Elena: Dr. Chen, Robert Kim, Dr. Walsh, Catherine Morrison, Marianne, Elena's parents, and several business associates. "Elena," Jennifer said, "Marcus just arrived with his attorney. He looks like he's beginning to understand the scope of what he's triggered."
"Good," Elena replied, adjusting Isabella's blanket as her daughters slept peacefully through the courthouse noise. Judge Patricia Santos called the hearing to order precisely at 9 a.m., and Elena found herself sitting at a table facing the man who'd tried to have her declared mentally incompetent while she held the daughter he was trying to take away from her. Marcus looked uncomfortable and slightly overwhelmed by the number of people who'd come to support Elena. His attorney, a thin man with nervous energy, kept glancing at Elena's legal team with visible concern. "This is an emergency custody hearing regarding Isabella Martinez-Chen," Judge Santos announced. "Mr. Martinez-Chen has filed for temporary custody based on concerns about the mother's mental stability and fitness to parent. Mrs. Martinez-Chen has filed a counter-motion claiming harassment and requesting permanent custody with limited visitation rights." Judge Santos looked directly at Marcus's attorney. "Counselor, please present your evidence for the claim that Mrs. Martinez-Chen poses a danger to the child's well-being." Elena watched as Marcus's attorney struggled to present a compelling case based on her business decisions. He argued that her exposure of Hartwell Industries demonstrated poor judgment and vindictive behavior that could harm Isabella's future financial security. "Your Honor," the attorney said, "Mrs. Martinez-Chen's recent actions have cost the family significant income and demonstrate an inability to prioritize the child's needs over personal vendettas." Judge Santos looked impassively, then turned to Jennifer. "Ms. Walsh, please respond to these allegations." Jennifer stood with the confidence of someone who'd been looking forward to this moment. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Sarah Chen to testify about Mrs. Martinez's behavior during and after childbirth." Dr. Chen took the witness stand and provided devastating testimony about Marcus's abandonment during labor, his business calls during delivery, and his attempts to have Elena declared mentally incompetent for making sound business decisions. "Dr. Chen," Jennifer said, "in your professional opinion, did Mrs. Martinez-Chen demonstrate competent judgment during the birth of her daughter?"
Absolutely. Despite being abandoned by her husband during active labor, Mrs. Martinez remained calm, made appropriate decisions about her care, and showed excellent maternal instincts with the baby. And in your opinion, do her business decisions regarding Hartwell Industries suggest mental instability? Quite the opposite. Mrs. Martinez-Chen identified serious safety violations that endangered hospital patients. Her decisions were not only professionally sound, but morally necessary. Marcus's attorney objected to the characterization of Hartwell Industries, but Judge Santos overruled him and asked Dr. Chen to explain the safety violations in detail. Elena watched Marcus's face as Dr. Chen described concrete that failed strength tests, electrical systems that didn't meet hospital standards, and fire suppression systems that had been installed incorrectly in pediatric wards. With each example, Marcus looked smaller and more uncomfortable. Dr. Chen, Jennifer continued, did Mr. Martinez prioritize these business concerns over his daughter's birth? Yes, he took multiple business calls during active labor and was absent from the delivery room when the baby was born. When he returned, he expressed more concern about follow-up calls with his clients than about holding his newborn daughter. Judge Santos was taking notes throughout Dr. Chen's testimony, her expression growing increasingly grim. Next, Jennifer called Robert Kim, who testified about Elena's ownership of Hartford General Hospital and the improvements she'd implemented to patient care standards. Mr. Kim, Jennifer said, in your opinion as a hospital board member, do Mrs. Martinez-Chen's business decisions demonstrate competent judgment? Mrs. Martinez-Chen has transformed Hartford General from a struggling facility to a model of patient care excellence. Her decision to expose Hartwell Industries protected not only our patients, but patients at hospitals throughout the region. Marcus's attorney tried to argue that Elena's hospital ownership was irrelevant to the custody dispute, but Judge Santos allowed the testimony to continue. Mr. Kim, did Mrs. Martinez consult with medical professionals before taking action against Hartwell Industries? She presented comprehensive documentation to our board, consulted with safety experts, and followed all appropriate protocols for reporting violations. Her actions were thoroughly professional and completely necessary. When Catherine Morrison took the stand, her testimony about Marcus's attempts to control Elena's decision-making through claims of mental incompetence was particularly damaging. Ms. Morrison, Jennifer asked, in your experience with patient advocacy, how would you characterize Mr. Martinez's behavior? Mr. Martinez displayed a pattern of behavior designed to isolate and control his wife during a vulnerable time. His attempts to have her declared mentally incompetent for making sound business decisions represent a form of psychological harassment. And in your opinion, does Mrs. Martinez demonstrate fitness as a parent? Mrs. Martinez has shown excellent judgment, appropriate priorities, and strong protective instincts regarding her daughter. Mr. Martinez, by contrast, has demonstrated a willingness to traumatize his newborn child in pursuit of financial control over his wife. Elena could see Marcus whispering urgently to his attorney, who looked increasingly desperate as the testimony continued. When Linda Rodriguez testified about caring for Elena and Isabella during their hospital stay, her testimony about Marcus's discomfort with basic parenting responsibilities was particularly effective. Nurse Rodriguez, Jennifer asked, did Mr. Martinez demonstrate appropriate interest in caring for his newborn daughter? He seemed reluctant to hold the baby and expressed concern about waking her up when asked if he wanted to participate in basic care. When Mrs. Martinez suggested he might want to cut the umbilical cord, he seemed alarmed by the idea. Did he show interest in learning about infant care? No, he was primarily focused on his phone calls and seemed to view the baby as something the medical staff should handle. Elena's parents testified about Marcus's pattern of dismissing Elena's professional accomplishments and treating her like a supporting character in his career advancement. Marianne provided particularly damaging testimony about Marcus's condescending attitude toward Elena's business activities. Ms. Curtis, Jennifer asked, how would you characterize Mr. Martinez's attitude toward your sister's professional success? He consistently minimized her accomplishments and treated her investment work like a hobby she was indulging until she came to her senses and focused on supporting his career, Marianne replied. He never showed any genuine interest in understanding what she'd built professionally. By the time Elena's witnesses finished testifying, Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His attorney had objected repeatedly but had been unable to challenge the substance of the testimony. When it was time for Marcus to testify in his own defense, his attorney tried to present him as a concerned father worried about his wife's recent erratic behavior. Mr. Martinez-Chen, his attorney asked, "Can you explain your concerns about your wife's recent business decisions?" Marcus spoke haltingly about Elena's interference with his client relationships and her refusal to consider the financial impact of her actions on their family. "My wife cost me the biggest commission of my career because she decided to pursue some kind of personal vendetta against a construction company," Marcus said. "That money was supposed to provide for Isabella's future." Judge Santos looked up from her notes with an expression that suggested Marcus had just made a significant error. "Mr. Martinez-Chen," the judge said, "are you testifying that you believe your wife should have overlooked safety violations that endangered hospital patients in order to protect your business commission?" Marcus looked panicked as he realized he'd walked into a trap. "No, Your Honor, that's not what I meant."
I just think she should have consulted with me before taking actions that affected our family's finances. Mr. Martinez-Chen, do you believe your wife should have obtained your permission before reporting safety violations at a hospital she owns? Marcus's attorney objected, but Judge Santos sustained her own line of questioning. Your Honor, I just think major decisions should be made jointly by both spouses, Marcus said weakly. Including decisions about public safety at medical facilities? Well, no, but... Mr. Martinez-Chen, why did you leave the hospital during your wife's labor? Marcus looked around the courtroom desperately. I had important business calls that couldn't wait. More important than the birth of your daughter? It wasn't supposed to take so long. I thought I could handle the call and be back before anything important happened. Elena watched Judge Santos's expression grow increasingly incredulous as Marcus continued trying to justify his behavior. Mr. Martinez-Chen, did you attempt to have your wife declared mentally incompetent for her business decisions? Marcus's attorney objected, but Judge Santos overruled him. I was concerned about her judgment, Marcus said. She seemed to be making emotional decisions that didn't consider the practical consequences. Such as protecting hospital patients from safety violations? Such as destroying my business relationships without discussing it with me first. Judge Santos was quiet for several long moments, studying her notes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. I've heard enough, she finally said. Mr. Martinez-Chen, your emergency custody petition is not only denied, it's dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Martinez-Chen will retain full physical and legal custody of Isabella Martinez-Chen. Elena felt a wave of relief so powerful that she had to grip the table to steady herself. Furthermore, Judge Santos continued, Mr. Martinez-Chen, your behavior as documented in this hearing suggests a pattern of harassment and manipulation that is concerning. I'm granting Mrs. Martinez-Chen's request for a restraining order that prohibits you from interfering with her business activities or attempting to have her declared mentally incompetent. Marcus's face went white as the judge continued. Visitation with Isabella will be supervised and limited to 4 hours per week until such time as you can demonstrate that you've addressed the behavioral issues documented in this hearing through counseling. The court recommends intensive therapy focusing on control issues and respect for your ex-wife's autonomy. Elena looked across the courtroom at Marcus, who appeared to be in shock. His attempt to take Isabella away from her had backfired so completely that he'd lost even basic unsupervised visitation rights. Mrs. Martinez-Chen, Judge Santos said, I want to commend you for your composed testimony and your obvious dedication to your daughter's well-being. The court finds that you are an exemplary mother and that Isabella is fortunate to have such a protective and competent parent. As they left the courthouse, Elena found herself surrounded by the people who'd supported her through the most challenging day of her life. Dr. Chen was beaming with satisfaction. Robert Kim looked like he'd just watched justice served perfectly. Catherine Morrison was taking notes for what would clearly become a textbook case of successful patient advocacy. Elena, Jennifer said as they reached the sidewalk, I've been practicing family law for 20 years, and I've never seen a custody case backfire more completely. Marcus's attorney basically argued that you should be punished for protecting public safety.
What happens next? Elena asked, adjusting Isabella's blanket as her daughter slept peacefully through the courthouse noise. Next, we finalize the divorce on terms that are extremely favorable to you. Marcus has no claim to any of your assets, he's lost credibility for any future custody challenges, and he's facing a restraining order that prevents him from interfering with your business decisions. Elena's father, who'd been quietly supportive throughout the proceedings, stepped forward with a proud smile. Elena, I want you to know that what you did today was incredibly brave. Standing up to Marcus, protecting Isabella, exposing those safety violations, all of it took tremendous courage. Thank you, Dad. Having all of you here made all the difference. As they walked toward the cars, Elena realized that the past 3 days had fundamentally changed her life. She'd given birth to her daughter, discovered her own strength, ended her marriage, and emerged from the most challenging experience of her life with a clarity about who she was and what she wouldn't accept. 6 months later, Elena was sitting in her renovated office at Hartford General Hospital, reviewing plans for the new children's wing while Isabella played contentedly in a designer baby carrier that allowed Elena to work hands-free. The hospital had become a regional model for patient care excellence, and Elena had emerged from anonymity to become an active and visible leader in healthcare administration. The Hartwell Industries investigation had resulted in criminal charges and an industry-wide review of construction standards that had prevented similar safety violations at dozens of other facilities. Marcus had completed court-mandated counseling and was slowly rebuilding a relationship with Isabella through supervised visits. The restraining order remained in place, and he'd made no further attempts to interfere with Elena's business activities. His commission income had dropped significantly after losing the Hartwell deal and several other clients who'd been concerned about his professional judgment. Elena's divorce had been finalized with a settlement that left her with all of her assets and primary custody of Isabella. Marcus paid substantial child support and had been ordered to contribute to Isabella's education fund, but he had no claim to Elena's business empire. Dr. Chen knocked on Elena's office and entered with a smile. "Elena, the board meeting is starting in 10 minutes. Are you ready to present the expansion plans?" "Ready," Elena replied, gathering her presentation materials while Isabella gurgled happily from her carrier. "I think they're going to be excited about the Family Support Center." "I'm sure they will be. Your patient advocacy initiatives have become the gold standard for the region." As Elena walked toward the boardroom, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the night Isabella was born. She'd gone from being a diminished wife making excuses for her husband's behavior to being a confident business leader who refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. The boardroom was full of medical professionals, administrators, and community leaders who valued her expertise and sought her input on complex healthcare decisions. No one questioned her judgment or suggested that her success was a fluke. "Good afternoon, everyone," Elena said, settling into her chair at the head of the conference table while Isabella observed the meeting with alert dark eyes. "Today, we're going to discuss plans for the most comprehensive family support center in the state." As she began her presentation, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the conference room windows. She looked like exactly what she was: a successful business leader, a devoted mother, and a woman who'd learned to use her own power without apology. Isabella made a soft sound that might have been approval, and Elena smiled as she continued explaining how Hartford General Hospital would continue setting new standards for patient care and family support. The little girl who'd been born during the most challenging night of her mother's life was growing up in a world where she would see her mother treated with respect, where she would understand that women could build empires and protect vulnerable people and refuse to accept diminishment from anyone. Elena had kept every promise she'd made to Isabella during those first difficult hours. She'd shown her daughter what it looked like to own your own power. She demonstrated that mothers could be successful business leaders and protective advocates, and strong, independent women who demanded to be treated as equals. Most importantly, she'd proven that sometimes the most challenging experiences reveal exactly who you're meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.